Is it possible to rebuild communities one family, one child at a time? Yeah, let's talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of The Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny, it's getting a little dark, I must confess, Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by the best heart health supplement in the world, Cardio Miracle. What does that mean? The best heart health supplement in the world. That means if you're looking to lower your blood pressure, lower your resting heart rate, improve that pump at the gym, well, what you got to do is scan that little QR code over my shoulder, because I have been seeing the benefits of Cardio Miracle for the past 2+ years, and I know for a fact you will as well. So if you want to learn more, again, scan that little QR code, or if you're joining us on the audio version of the show, head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS, and you'll know you're in the right spot, because a little note will pop up at the top saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols, but also you're going to get 15% off your order. One more time, Cardio Miracle, the best heart health supplement in the world. So last week, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, we were talking about, helping get kids focusing on doing better in school, focusing on doing so through fashion, right? We had a really good chat last week, but today we're talking about rebuilding communities. And this is something that I think is very important, especially as we're looking to get away from this world right now where everything seems very divisive. You're feeling that everybody is no longer in this neighborly mentality, but more of, is this person a potential threat? And it's heartbreaking, right? So how did we get here? We always talk about politics being downstream from culture. Well, that means something's broken in the culture. Well, what happens? Well, we've seen families get broken, and families get broken because of a lot of other issues that surround not just culture, but also surround the other extenuating circumstances. So how do we fix one family at a time? Is it via one child at a time, or is it something different? Joining me here today on the Brian Nichols Show is Dewayne Moore. Dewayne, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
Man, I'm doing fine. Thank you, Brian, for hosting me on your show today and bringing awareness to what we're doing throughout our community, throughout our country. So we're excited to kind of chat it up with you today about what we got going on, sir.
I'm excited to learn more because I heard you're getting ready to launch, or you just did launch, the Unspoken Legacy Academy. So I want to learn more about that, but also I want to learn more about you, Dewayne, before we get started, because I find it is your story, right? And as I have guests on the show, I like to have them tell their story that really helps articulate your mission, right? I look to where I am today, and my mission is absolutely built upon who I am as a person and kind of like my upbringing and my kind of coming of age story. So I would love to hear a little bit more about who you are and what kind of propelled you to want to first and foremost bring this transformative approach to communities, to families, but doing so with this this approach of leading with faith. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Man, I appreciate the opportunity to share my story. I can talk about a lot, about what God has done for me and the doors that has been open throughout my 50 years almost living in this earth. The one thing I always go back to, I never had a father per se in my household. And getting the opportunity to play sports, playing football at the highest level, collegiate, as well as, kind of bounced around from some different pro leagues. So getting the opportunity to coach and play across our country, what it did for me, it helped me create a platform. But not only did it help me create a platform, it helped me be discipled by some great men, number one, on to some great coaches. And that's when I come to the real reality that a couple of things that I realized, that I had lack of the right information to educate me. I had lack of exposure, and I had lack of preparation and equipping for opportunities that was made available. And so a lot of times, we may get access, but getting access, are you qualified for that access? And a lot of times it's almost the old saying, I can get you in the room and I can get you at the table, but I can't eat for you. And so a little bit about me, just growing up in a single parent home, watching my mom go through the struggle, understanding now social economic suppression, didn't understand that as a teenager, as a child. But the one thing that I knew, I lacked a male model in my life at home. And so, going through that, it helped me create the platform that we have now to kind of go back and look at what's going on throughout our country. Because when you say throughout our country, I know every time, when you say that, people first thing they think about is politics. First thing I think about, what are the pillars in our community? Because you can't have country unless you have community. And so when you start looking at throughout our communities, there's not many male role models. There are not many males who want to disciple other young men unless it's quote unquote sports. And so, so when a kid is not wrapped into sports, where's that great coach? They're not available. And so when we start to look at this throughout our country, we start to look at the breakdown within communities, and looking at those breakdowns in community, it always started with character perspectives. And if you don't have a male model in a house, a young man cannot glean from a woman. As much as a woman can raise a young man to be a young man, but there's so many things that's missing in his life if he doesn't have that male model. And so that really motivated us, after, traveling the country, playing sports, traveling the country with being in the military. It gave me an opportunity to see what I was lacking as a young man. And, the thing that really helped me understand where I'm at today and what it takes to disciple young men and women is if you don't have that model for them to be able to touch, it makes it very difficult.
Well, you mentioned the taking of the male model out of the home. We've seen in more contemporary experiences, they're taking them out of the culture as well. There's this war on masculinity. We did this episode back a few weeks ago. There was an article that was more or less an expose on what happened with the DEI over the past few years, and not just the approach of how much it destroyed a lot of white millennial men, but specifically there was in this article coded anti-masculine sentiments. And when you start to really uncover the why behind it, it really does open your eyes, Dewayne, because if you take men out of the home, you take men out of the culture, you take men out of the entertainment, and you start to glorify this, and pardon the expression, but this almost pussified version of a man. And instead of having what actual masculinity looks like, right? As something that young men can now look to as a North Star, because for every perspective of there's a man to help guide a young man in forming formulate his upbringing and his experiences, to have an older man in your life as kind of like a check also to your negative your negative proclivities, that's also important, and to help kind of get you on that straight and narrow path. That's as important as the positive advice, that kind of corrective advice as well. And when you're missing that on all aspects, both in the home, in the culture, in society and entertainment, or just by and large, no wonder we have seen such strife societally. We see such rising rates of, especially in men, loneliness and suicides and drug use and porn addiction. And it's horrifying to see that when you see, in a lot of cases, unfortunately, people in positions of government start to play these kind of roles of deciding what's good and what's bad, and then setting policy to it. There are very much these butterfly effects that might not manifest tomorrow, but my goodness, they're going to manifest a generation or two later. And you're seeing it right now with what we had happen, go back to the 60s with the war on poverty and the Civil Rights Act and all the things that happened thereafter. All of a sudden, you have a society where men have been completely removed from a lot of Black homes. And it's tragic because you see the manifestation in those communities. I lived in more or less just adjacent to what you'd consider the ghettos in Philadelphia, in West Philadelphia, for a number of years when I was out in that neck of the woods. And it was tragic to see, there were so many young boys out there who had no dads. They had no role models. They had no male models or figures to look up to. And there was a guy on our street named Lee. And I remember my wife and I, we would talk to Lee, and he was in his 60s, late 60s or so. And he would just be like, he called me B. He goes, B, he goes, I don't know what to do with these young boys anymore. He goes, I'm afraid to even talk to them. I'm afraid that they might shoot me. And I'm like, what a tragic mindset to have, that as a man who wants to help, there is a fear because of what has happened to a lot of young men. So I say all that, and I tell my story Dewayne, you're out, you're talking to these folks in communities, and you're seeing firsthand, day in and day out, stories just like what I articulated. And I guess
right.
like I look at that and I see something that's almost, dare I say, insurmountable. But you're approaching this through a much different perspective. You see things through a hopeful lens, and you're also leading with faith. And I want, of course, those two things do go hand in hand, of course, right? So tell us a little bit more though about your approach and what you're finding to be successful, because you are finding success. And I think we want to really emphasize that.
Well, here's the thing, man. You know, the one thing that I learned, it's kind of like kids, especially the ones who are critical at risk. So when I say critical at risk, you throw that word out, that phrase out there, most people think of drug addiction or, you know, all this and below poverty, you name it. But when I talk about critical at risk, kids who lack a certain kind of attention. And when you say certain kind of attention, when you look at suburban America, you look at inner city America, you look at rural America, most of the time in inner city, urban America, there's not a father in the house. So how can a young man get the attention that he's deserving of? It automatically puts him critical at risk. When you bring social economics into the place, now does the kid lack resources to get exposure? The kid lack resources to get the right information to educate. So you're dealing with all these different dynamics now. So now you got a kid, it's almost like he's swinging, but he ain't landing anything. And so it's almost like, you know, it's cliche, you're slinging mud, hoping something big. So these particular kids, when they don't get this level of discipleship, when they don't get this level of mentorship, they're put in a predicament where they lose hope. When they lose hope, that's when you start to see grades start to fail. That's when you start to see fights start to break out in school. That's when you see kids start joining gangs, and that leads on to gang violence. Then that leads on to juvenile corrections and prison sentences. And so what we start to do is just reach out and touch. And I know a lot of times when you say reach out and touch, you're like, man, are you saying in a literal sense? Yes, in a literal sense. If you can reach out and touch a kid start to understand that he's more concerned about how much you care about him than how much you know. Because a lot of times we take the approach of, we just got to educate these kids. Yes, we got to educate these kids, but we got to embrace them first. We got to love them first, because we must understand, if you can touch a kid and you can embrace that kid and show love, now you can actually educate that kid. I read a book some years ago, Coach Paul Bear Bryant from the University of Alabama. He had a 4I pillar. And the 4I pillar was that if I can invest in an athlete, it gives me a platform to influence him. If I can influence that athlete through impact, I will inspire him to change his life. And so that's the thing that we start to understand, Brian, that if we, number one, invest in our young men and women, it will provide us a platform to influence them. You can't take an individual who is hungry, whether he's hungry for literal food, or he's hungry for substance, or he's hungry for opportunity. He got to know, number one, how much you care. And number one, if you're willing to invest in him, he understands at that point, he really cares about me. Now, through that influence of discipleship and mentorship, you can start to see the turn. You can start to see the turn. Trust me. We've helped about 300 kids get the D1, D2, HBC university. And I'm not talking about on athletic scholarships. We talking about academic scholarships. We talking about young men who had less than a 2.0 GPA that was failing in all their core subjects, able through impact and discipleship, raise that up above a 2.5, a 3.0, getting on into the 3.5. And it all started with just an opportunity to invest. So there's change available, but a lot of times we miss, I say, the number one most valuable piece of the puzzle is sometimes we think it's all resources, monetary gifts and donations and donors. It takes that too, but it takes time. Time is the one thing that we can't get back. And that's what these kids need, someone to invest time in them.
You're trying to stay sharp, whether it's for work, learning, or just not forgetting where you left your keys. Been there. But lately, the mental fog hits hard. And brain fog isn't just stress. It's often tied to poor blood flow and low nitric oxide levels, because your brain needs oxygen just as much as your other muscles do. Because without it, you're slower to process, less focused, and more fatigued. And that's one of the many reasons why I trust Cardio Miracle.
Not only does it boost nitric oxide for heart and circulation, it supports cognitive clarity, focus, and even mood regulation thanks to its unique blend of L-arginine, CoQ10, vitamin D3, and antioxidant-rich superfoods. So if you're tired of feeling mentally cloudy, give your brain what it's craving. Click the link in the show notes, scan that little QR code over my shoulder, or head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS, which will give you 15% off your order. Just look for the little note on the website saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now let's get back to the show. I was moving, when I first moved to my town here, I noticed that there was this little place down the road, and they had a little sign out front, and it was like a mentor thing. And I ducked my head in, and they were like, "Oh my God, please, we need younger men, like men in their 30s and 40s to help mentor these young men, because we're only getting these older guys." And I paused and I thought to that, and I was like, interesting, because when you think about it, and this is the unfortunate reality, a lot of men my age, we have families of our own. We have careers, we have commitments, and to invest more time in trying to help another person now, it's like almost mentally exhausting, and it's another thing on the list. But when you pause and you think of the downstream, again, those butterfly effect implications of not being involved, of not engaging, of not being the one to stand up and say, you know what, no, I'm gonna try to take some time to mentor this guy. Like you see it, right? You've seen the horror stories. I saw the horror stories. I'll never forget one day my wife and I were coming back from an event, and as you're getting close to the neighborhood, we were Ubering over because we would, when you're in downtown Philly, especially, you don't want to park anywhere. And we were Ubering back, and all of a sudden you get closer and you see that it's a dark night. The sky is kind of overcast, and you see the reflection of all the flashing lights. And as we get to our house, you see like just perpendicular to our house, kitty corner. There was like probably 3 or 4 ambulances. There's a drive-by shooting that happened like immediately to our neighborhood. And it was like a bunch of kids who were in their 14, 15-year-old kind of range that did it. And it's just that when you hear that, it makes it really, I mean, it's tragic by default, but it guts you, because you're thinking, these kids, did they ever really have a shot? Right? Like what did they have, or what didn't they have? What were they lacking in their lives? And probably more importantly, right, Dewayne, who were they lacking? Where was that dad? Where was that male figure?
That's right.
And I guess to that example, right? And this might be a little controversial, but I've seen this a lot, where there has been this the black mom kind of perspective of almost treating her children as they were her daughters, right? Like not holding them to account. Is that instinctually a feminine thing that we see, where women just aren't able to deal with boys? Or is it something different in more of a cultural standpoint? Because I know I do see a conversation more split along racial lines. So help us kind of understand what that looks like from your perspective.
I've probably, the statement I'm about to make now, I probably said it 10 times in the last 10 days. What generation or what year, I will say what decade, when you talk about, I was raised, in the 80s, in the 90s as a teenager, and I started to think about simplicity, how we looked at holidays, how we reverence holidays, and the time that we shared with family. I think about the brotherhood and the camaraderie of what family and meant to us in those days. And now I start to look today at young girls, cursing around their moms. I see young girls dressed in a certain way, and then I look over at the mom and see the mom dressed the very same way. And I'm thinking, well, who's the daughter, who's the mom? I see young men cursing out teachers and coaches, and I'm thinking, man, back in like the 80s and 90s, if I had even cursed around a coach, I mean, there's no telling what would have happened. And I look at now the freedom of how young men and women are able to talk and carry themselves. I'm like, where did we go wrong? Like, at what point did we go wrong? And so it's very true to what you're saying. if you think about it, going back to biblical foundation, it was really never meant for the mom to really be ministering and discipling a young man. And when you look at the father, his first ministry was the family. And he was supposed to spend that type of time with that son. Because from a biblical standpoint of view, not to be biblical contextual, but from a biblical standpoint of view, once the father seen that the son had took his place as a young man, he sent him away. And sending him away was for him to create an identity based off certain principles that the father had taught him, certain principles the father had groomed him. So if it takes a man to teach a man how to be a man, then a woman really don't stand a chance. And that's what happened to me. It as good as my mom and my grandmother was, I started to realize they didn't teach me how to be a man. And so now at 17, 18, 19 years old, something as simple as I'm talking to a coach and he says, son, stand up and look me in my eyes. I'm like, no one ever told me that. I was never, taught these principles. And so when you think about it from a perspective, young people today really don't even understand where they're at. So if you don't understand where you at, you have no foundation. You can't build an infrastructure without no foundation. So now being able to bring a level of awareness of where you at today, where are you trying to go, and what does it take to get there? Well, now we got to put some principles in place. And so that's why we started Unspoken Legacy, because it's an online character development program to help young men and women understand, hey, you got to have some metrics in place. Because if you're trying to go somewhere, if you're trying to accomplish something, then what are the metrics and principles that you have to put in place for life today? And so a lot of times it's foreign. It's foreign. I'm being honest with you.
If you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? So you have to put metrics in place. You have to put, and by the way, this is like, I used to teach us a lot with my go-to-market and sales dev teams. Like they would hate the fact that I would hold them accountable to number of calls. And the reason I was like, listen, I'm not one of those guys who wants you to smile and dial, but I also do understand the reality that activity breeds results. And there are thresholds. I know that on average, if you do X, Y, and Z, you are going to yield A, B, and C. So I'm going to ask you to, at the very least, put forth these efforts until you show me you can achieve the outcome we're looking to accomplish in a different way. Like I had one sales guy, David, which I know David listens to the show. So David, this is your story, of course, where he would sit down and he would book on average 20 plus appointments a week. My quota for my team was around 5. And that was like when we got cooking with gas. So he was doing 20 to 30 at his, actually, I think at his height, he did like 50 something appointments in a month. It was insane. But David would approach things in a very different way where he wasn't doing the 100 dials, 150 dials. He was doing like 35, but they were targeted. They were hyper researched. And he went out of his way to present himself as an expert by helping almost speak their language. So if he's calling a credit union, for example, he wasn't calling and talking about their customers. He was talking about their members, right? Because that's verbiage that they use. But he was booking appointments like crazy. And it's because he was doing things in a different way. And partly it was because he said, I don't want to do that many phone calls. And I said, okay, book the appointments in a better way. And he did. And that right there, right? That speaks to, I coached him. I mentored him. You coach, you've been coached, you coached. And there is something about the idea of having the authoritative male figure, whether it is a dad, whether it is a coach, whether it is a principal, a teacher, a mentor in church, whatever it may be, to have that wisdom, right? It's not just the masculinity, but it's the wisdom with the masculinity. And there's something about young men, especially in their late teens, early 20s, they're particularly dangerous because they not only have, and I'm saying this not to be disparaging to my younger listeners, but you have zero experience in life yet. Right. Yet you have all the piss and vinegar of the world, right? You have all the energy because you're young. You have this fiery substance that goes through our veins called testosterone, which when you're in your 20s and you see beautiful women around you, God bless, right? So all of a sudden you have these young men who they quite literally are dangerous, right? They get very aggressive. And you need to have an older man with the years, the wisdom, the experience to help temper that. And I'm wondering, like, if you've seen success in helping, especially young men in their, maybe they're not in school, right? They're maybe a little bit later in life. I said later in life, maybe they're in their 20s. So they're not necessarily maybe aiming to go to college, but maybe they want to start a business, or maybe they haven't even thought about that. Are there other avenues beyond going to, a land of academia that you guys are talking about or working about in these communities to help, give alternative avenues where maybe somebody's like, college isn't for me, but there's something else I might get some value from?
Man, absolutely. Matter of fact, I'm partnering with 3 18-year-olds now. One just graduated high school. We started a lawn care business last year. We helped him got set up through SunBiz, got his LLC, got his tax ID number, end up opening up a business account for him, and just sitting down, helping them build out a business portfolio on how to approach clients. And young man that just came to me and say, Coach, I don't want to go to college. School just not for me. I got through 12 years because I want to prove that, I can complete what I started, but I want to go to work. And when he laid out enough of his vision of what he wanted to do, I'm like, man, listen, I know tons of people. We can get you in business tomorrow. That's one particular business doing very well. He graduated last year high school, hit the ground running. We started out with 2-3 clients just to sort of kind of let him get his foot wet, want to see what type of, how credible he was going to be with showing up, making sure he was persistent and consistent, making sure he was showing up every day at the same time, doing it the same way, to be unique so he couldn't be denied. And now he has 100 clients. That's less than 1 year. Yeah. And you think about the amount of money he would have wasted just putting him off in some college, putting him off in some trade school. Man, you don't have to go to trade school to learn how to cut grass.
I was doing that when I was 7. I remember my dad had the I hope OSHA is not listening, or Child Protective Services retroactively. We had the lawnmower, and I wasn't tall enough. Believe it or not, I'm 6'5". But at the time, I was not tall enough to drive the lawnmower. So Dad, in his ingenuity, he took a block of wood and he duct taped it to the brake. So I had enough leg room to reach the brake, so I could actually drive the riding lawnmower at the tender age of 7. So that was good times. Man, to your point, growing up in the 90s and in 2000s, it's a different era. But nowadays you'd have Child Protective Services called on you.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, good time.
Yeah,
but, no, I mean, going back to like the idea again of just masculinity, right? And I want to just quickly pivot towards the church. I know we're getting towards the end of the conversation, but faith is a big part of your message. And I just want to look at the church in particular, because we've seen there has been this, and I don't mean to bring politics into this right now, but there's a much more progressive mentality into the church that has been really growing over the past 20, 30 years. I see this. I was a United Methodist for my entire life. I was ordained as United Methodist, and I watched as my home church, disaffiliated from United Methodist Church because of the seeping of these progressive leftist, more social values have gotten into the church. And a lot of those different progressive social views, Dewayne, they do happen to kind of, at the very least, they toe the line, if not are kissing cousins with some of these anti-masculine perspectives. So absolutely. What are you finding in the church? Are you getting embraces, or are you getting pushback?
Man, I'll be honest with you. Man, I grew up in the church, and God knows I love the church. I grew up non-denomination, more Pentecostal, evangelical, but looking at the church today, man, we so far off. I mean, I hate to say that, because I understand the church is the heart, the church is the relationship, but the building and the congregants, that fellowship, we've lost the touch. We've lost the touch, and it's biblical. My people will call by my name if they will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their unrighteous ways. Then will you hear from heaven, and I'll heal your land. And we see this land being so wicked because the church that used to be a pillar within our community, within our states, within our country, just have lost the strength. God has not lost any strength. but the people who are governing the churches per se. And yes, we get a lot of pushback. We believe in providing hand-ups, not handouts. We don't want to crutch individuals. I was out in the streets the other day, Fort Myers, Florida. Homeless guy sitting at a bus stop, and I walk up to him and I say, "Hey man, can I sit down and talk to you?" First thing he do, he's asking me for some money. I'm like, "I'm gonna get you the money, but I got a couple of things I want to ask you, and there's a couple of things that I want you to do for me." And offer this individual 18 months, 3 meals a day, room and board, and the only thing I want to do is disciple him. He turned me down. He said, "All I need from you is $5." And so
Level 365 gives you real US-based support from real people who know the platform, so help is always easy to reach. Whether you need answers, changes, or troubleshooting, you'll talk to someone who can actually help. And as your business evolves, support scales with you. It's all powered by one dependable UC platform. Learn more at level365.com.
I'm saying it to say, the one thing that young man said to me was, he was like, "Oh man, are you one of these Christian guys? And is this facility that you're talking about, is it ran by the church?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a Christian." And I'm like, "Yeah, the facility that I'm talking about, we have some church government that supports it." He's like, "Man, I don't have anything to do with it." Because he realized, and he spoke it to me, he said, the church is no longer what the church used to be. And that's a sad reality. And you're right. Ideologically, the left is pushing so much and is pushing off into the church, where we don't have the conservative value inside the church as it used to be. I remember back in the day, what we call Christian conservative values today used to just be God's church. And now I can almost walk in the church and just listen to a message and be like, "Oh my goodness, I could tell the way he votes." I hate to say it that way, but you see it. Like, when did it ever become okay for, and I don't want to get off into the political side of things, because I can go that way too. But when in our American society that it was okay for a young man to be comfortable dressed up as a woman, and we're seeing it in the church now. And I get it. Everybody come as you are, but I think Christ was saying, "Come as you are in heart, and not in the many certain high heels."
No, I don't think that part was implied in the teachings. But when you're looking, and by the way, like the reality is, politics is downstream from culture, and unfortunate reality is that as much as we want to avoid politics, public policy is shaped by politics. So we have to, and this is where I'm a big proponent of Pastor Mark Driscoll out of the Trinity Church over there in Arizona. I listen to his sermons quite a bit, because I think he has a very good approach to bridging the political and the religious, because you need to be able to have your political self professing your Christian values, not in an overbearing way to take over or to push others away, but rather to make sure as a country we are always adhering to God's will. Which, by the way, if you look at our founding documents, they are all built on a Christian moral framework, a moral ethos. I believe it was James Madison, keep me honest, comments in the comment section below. I think it was he who said that, or maybe it was John Adams, that the American framework would only work if it was built on a Christian moral society. So it was John Adams. I knew it was either Madison or Adams. It was one of those two. It was pick your John. Or I guess it's John or James. Yeah, whatever. But I digress. When we're looking at where we are today, we have drifted so far away. And it's wild. I watch these movies with my daughter. She's a little girl, and we're watching the old classics, the 90s Disney movies and stuff. But you see this secularism really, it seeps into the content that even you and I grew up with, Dewayne, and to see that now as a dad, and I'm like, no wonder I have a bunch of crazy millennial women that are in my generation who are going out and, again, not to get political, but like thinking that they can go and take on all these ICE agents. And I'm like, where did this come from? And a lot of it it comes from the culture, right? It does. And I watch the stuff where it's like, And yes, we always watch the rebels versus the empire, that kind of story, right? Everybody gets all excited. But like, to see where we are in this story, I'm like, how did we get here? How did our story as a society get here? So I say all that, Dewayne. I know we're hard pressed for time, but like, looking at where we go from here, right? When we're looking at masculinity, when we're talking about our faith manifests both in terms of how we rebuild communities, but also how we rebuild our public policy, which is the reality. It's going to be through both the culture and the politics, because again, they go hand in hand. What do you see as a viable blueprint for even just like my audience to listen to today, to like take away and maybe even have like an action item? But then back to the point you raised earlier, and what metrics can we put with this? What tangible things can people start to say, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I'm actually able to capture that data. I know I'm doing well. And where do you think, if we follow this blueprint, where would that lead us in a positive direction? I'm assuming, but give us what your vision, what that might look like.
Man, something that we're doing now, Brian, and I could throw a few websites out there that we got, www.DewayneMoore.net, which is our foundation, and then we got Path with Anchor, and then unspokenlegacy.org. And what we're doing is the opportunities that we're providing is our literacy act. And when I talk about our literacy action, is the law literacy piece and the financial literacy piece. We must get these individuals educated with the right information, because let me tell you, if people continue to get left behind because they don't have access to information, I go around this country, I can tell you, in some of these areas, in rural areas throughout our country, in inner city areas, we have no magnet programs. We don't have access to literacy, information to really educate these kids. These kids are going to be discipled by somebody. I was telling the school board superintendent on this morning, you got dope dealers sitting in 5th grade right now. Somebody got their hands on them. You got your next murderer that's sitting in 7th grade right now. Somebody got their hands on them. Just as we forecast and we project the next president, the next attorney, the next banker, the next broker, you got the next dope dealer, we got the next rapist, we got the next molester that's sitting in somebody's elementary school right now. You got an opportunity. You got a unique opportunity right now to really reach out and touch these kids and get them the right information. There's a reason why they want to dismantle the Board of Education from the federal level and return it back to the state. There's a reason why, because there's not a gap in between what we're seeing at home, what we're seeing at school. And so when that gaps get wider, these kids are going to be very dangerous, as we said earlier. And we're seeing it. We're seeing that. I mean, I'm out in Southwest Florida. Majority of my time in Southwest Florida, and I'm in Lee County. You go in some of these schools, man, I'm telling you, you would think it was Lean on Me. I don't know if you remember that show back in the 80s with Joe Clark, Lean on Me. Man, you can go in some of these schools and you'll think you're in a jungle. I'm being honest with you. You're like, wow. I was in the auditorium last week. So I'm going into school to get my pass to go talk to 300 kids in the auditorium. And I remember the assistant principal was like, be careful out there. I'm like, I'm going to the auditorium with some kids. She said, I kid you not, man. I'm like, I'm not going to one. I'm going to the auditorium. And she said, be careful. I'm like, well, do I need to go get a bulletproof vest? But, again, jokingly, I remember walking in the auditorium. And I stood up, I was like, hey, I got about 100 questions today. And I always take like a handful of McDonald's gift cards, a handful of Chick-fil-A gift cards, handful of Subway gift cards. And I'm like, I got 100 questions. If you can answer the question, you get a gift card. Remember the first young lady, she was in 9th grade. I said, stand up, give me your name. And I asked her, I said, hey, what's your vision? She said, my vision. She said, what does that mean? And I said, well, what are your dreams? She said, I didn't have any dreams last night. I'm like, no. I'm like, what do you want to be like when you grow up? And she said, oh, I hadn't thought that far. I'm like, well, you're in 9th grade. Like, you only got like, so long to be thinking about this. I'm like, well, have you started talking to the guidance counselor? And she was like, well, what is that? I'm like, what year am I living in? If you don't know what a guidance counselor is, you're definitely not talking to a guidance counselor who will help you construct what that vision should look like. That guidance counselor should be there to pull out, like, well, are you good with your hands? Do you like being outside, inside? All these different types of metrics. And I'm like, we're really this lost. And I'm thinking to myself, these 300 kids that I just talked to don't even have a clue. And you talk about these are 9th graders, 10th graders, 11th graders, 12th graders, don't even have a clue on what that world really looks like out there. And a lot of times, and I know people hate when I say that, it's not about black, it's not about white, it's about opportunities. Because at the end of the day, we can either be on the prevention side or we could be on the side to where our taxpaying dollars are taking care of those young people in the federal penitentiaries, in the state penitentiary, in the juvenile correction facility, because someone lacked to bridge that gap that was getting wider and wider, and we seeing more young people fall through those cracks. So my encouragement would be reach out and touch. If you have foundations that's throughout the community and the grassroots who are helping young people, call them up. I know we got some big commercial corporate type ones, but the ones that are really in touch with the community, the youth groups, there's so many opportunities out there, Brian. I'm being real. It's a lot of opportunity, but we just need people to be willing to give some time.
Amen. Dewayne, you're doing the Lord's work. Thank you for helping change the culture, because when you're changing the lives of young men, you're not just changing them today, you're changing them tomorrow, you're changing them next week, next year, next decade. And what that will end up leading to, right, is going to be just this sea of good, right, that you've helped propel forward. And I'm hoping that your message today really resonates with folks who they feel empowered, right? The whole idea of this show is to educate, enlighten, and inform, with the goal of leaving you, the audience, empowered. And I want you to leave to say, where can I make an impact in my community today? Can I go and get involved with a men's group here in my community? Can I go and become a mentor at a youth group or at a nonprofit that maybe is built to help give young men access to those types of mentorships? Take the initiative, reach out, go and talk to somebody in your community, or do a quick Google search, and I'm sure you'll find some place, right, that's looking for help. And it will be embraced. Your help will 1000% be embraced. So I say all that, Dewayne, I've really enjoyed today's conversation, and I'd be remiss if I did not give you the platform here to promote, of course, all the great work you're doing. So where can folks go ahead and reach out if they want to learn more? And of course, tell us about the new organization you started here this past year.
Man, Unspoken Legacy, we started out of Cape Coral High School, to where we start to understand that as the coaches want to coach the X's and O's, we want to take the character perspective, because what we understood, a lot of times we have expectation for young men and young women, even adults. We have an expectation for them, but when you look at the foundation, is there some cracks? And so, teaching young men, it's simple tools that will go with them for the rest of their life, because that was the approach we wanted to take. And so what we was able to do, we was able to build out a program called Unspoken Legacy. And what Unspoken Legacy is all about is we get these young men in the program once a week, we sit down in front of them and we have real conversation. And that's based off of the coursework that they're taking. There's 12 courses that's inside our portal. Once they take all 12 courses, they get a certificate of completion, and then we take them on to the next phase of the Legacy program. I would encourage anybody that wants to get involved, if you go to www.unspokenlegacy.org, it's our online character development program that we have started here in Lee County out in Southwest Florida.
All right, folks. Well, if you got some value from today's conversation, you know the drill. Go ahead, give it a share. When you do, tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty on X, Facebook, and Instagram. And you can find the Brian Nichols Show over on your favorite podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or if you like to watch your shows, head to Rumble, YouTube, or Facebook and X, and make sure you hit that little subscribe button and that little notification bell, because we air our shows every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, both here on the Brian Nichols Show, but also you can go ahead and check it out over on the Lions of Liberty Network, where you can also subscribe to 4 other phenomenal shows, including the shows Politics, which is all of the hosts come together, and all the hosts is yours truly, plus Brian McWilliams, John Odermatt, and Lou Perez over at Lions of Liberty. But as for the Brian Nichols Show, yes, every Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern, I guarantee you hit that subscribe button and you're going to find an episode that's going to leave you educated, enlightened, and informed. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and say goodbye. So, folks, remember, if you are looking to improve your heart health, head to cardiomiracle.com. And with that being said, Dewayne, I'll give you the final word for today. What do you want to leave the audience with?
Man, what I'm going to leave the audience with, what I always do, man, find some young person, find some individual that lack stewardship in their life, and be the pillar that can help them get on the right path. And just be the model. As I always tell people, there's somebody that you can reach out and touch. And if we all have that mentality that we can reach out and touch somebody, man, I think we got more than 200 some million people living in this country. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I know, we got about 200 million people living in this country. If we all reach out and touch somebody, man, we're going to have a great country.
Be the ripple. With that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Dewayne Moore. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.